So what if I were to tell you that Akron, Ohio is actually the original North Pole? I'm not talking about the geographic point at the very top of the earth. I'm talking about the place where Santa Claus lives. This is the story of the Blue Santa, the oldest American Santa, and he's the real Santa Claus, the Santa Claus that brought toys to all the good girls and boys. He's a metaphor of mass production. He's the real Santa, the Santa who brings toys to all the children of the world. And this is the story of how he came into being. There have been toy makers as long as there have been people alive. And all of those toys were handmade. The first toys were marbles. And marbles were made of clay. And everybody's handmade their own marbles. They've all taken a marble and rolled it in their hand. And that's how all marbles were made, going back to the ancient days of the pharaohs in Egypt, when Moses was a little boy knuckling down and playing for keeps. Handmade toys, however, very expensive. If you think of a very famous handmade toy, Pinocchio, Geppetto, who made him, probably spent 2 months making one toy. So he was so expensive that only the very wealthiest could afford to buy a toy that was handmade. This meant that only the sons and daughters of the wealthiest people could have toys. And the rest of the children, well, they might play with a stick or a stone or a piece of discarded rope, but they couldn't own or play with the toys that the wealthy children played with. This went throughout history until in the early 1880s in Akron, Ohio, a gentleman named Samuel Dyke discovered a way to mass produce toys. And those first toys that were mass produced were marbles, little clay marbles. Of course, at that time, marbles were the most popular toy. All the children played marbles, boys and girls, and they would play them as often as they could. Mass production changed how the world looked at toys, because for the first time in history, all children could have a toy. For a penny, a child could have a whole handful of marbles. Or any one of these little penny toys. The mass production of marbles in Akron became such an important and valuable industry. Eventually, there were 33 marble factories in Akron. But that was just the beginning of the story, because on the other side of Akron, there were these gentlemen looking for new uses for rubber. They saw what was going on with the manufacture of marbles, and they knew that if they could make a rubber toy that children liked and mass produce it, they too could hook into this very valuable industry for children. So they turned out the world's first mass-produced balloons, rubber balls, rubber duckies, and rubber dollies, and rubber baby buggy bumpers. By the 1950s, there were as many as 170 toy companies having been in Akron. We know that today as basically the world toy industry. And it all got its start right here where we are sitting at Lock 3 Park in downtown Akron. This was the site of American Marble and Toy Manufacturing Company, where those first marbles were mass produced. In the winter of 2001-2002, the city of Akron allowed a group of archaeologists from the American Toy Marble Museum to come down to Lock 3 Park and do an archaeological excavation. And during the months that we dug here, we discovered tens of thousands of marbles. We would walk away in the evening with 5-gallon bucketfuls of marbles that were from half an inch to as large as 3 inches. These marbles had never been seen before to any extent. Of course, we also found the little penny toys. There were little brown jugs, the miniature replicas of a woman's shoes, men's boots, cats and dogs and little pots and things. One of the most amazing little penny toys that we discovered was a little figurine of an elderly man with a white beard and a blue hooded coat. And initially, the people that saw it thought, it must be some kind of wizard. But that's where the story starts to get very interesting. Because in the 1880s in Akron, we had a very large German population, over 30% of the population. These were recent immigrants. And when they came to Akron, they brought with them all of their Christmas traditions. And the little figurine that we discovered was Santa Claus. And he was made in the German tradition, wearing a blue hooded coat. We know today that this little Santa is the oldest three-dimensional image of Santa Claus that's known to exist. We've been researching this now for almost 10 years, and we haven't found a Santa Claus that comes even close to this age. He's very special, very valuable, and he seems to have tremendous magical powers in him. He gives a lot of joy to everybody who sees him. Part of the archaeological process is figuring out how these toys were manufactured. And the Blue Santa is a press mold product. And the method in which it was made was long lost. It being actually one of the very first mass-produced toys, and so the manufacturing of toys had changed very rapidly, and soon it was forgotten how they were made. So going back and trying to figure out how it was made was actually a process in itself. But doing this, we were able to eventually figure out how they were made, and we started manufacturing replicas as part of this discovery process. And this little Santa is an almost exact replica of the original. We're not trying to make it look as though we're reproducing the identical one, who definitely looks like he was buried for 120 years. But you can see how there was a press pushed into to fill up a mold, and the mold was made of plaster. The making of plaster molds in Akron used to be a huge industry in itself. So this little Santa Claus, who fits just perfectly in the palm of a hand, one of the ways he was used was as a wishing Santa, that a little boy or girl would hold him in his hand and would wish, "Oh, Santa Claus, will you please bring me a bicycle for Christmas?" So we have noticed that little children actually do that, and they seem to know instinctively what that's for, and they will just hold on to that little Santa wherever they go. They've got a tight grip. They don't want to let little Santa go. And they'll talk about what they want for Santa. They'll talk about what Santa Claus means to them. And Santa Claus to little 10-year-old means a whole lot more than he does to anybody else. So when the Germans started emigrating to the United States and found their way to Ohio, and specifically here to Akron, this was in the period just before the Civil War, in the 1850s through the 1860s. And when they came to Akron, they brought with them all of their old traditions, their Christmases. And their Christmases is a lot more than what we know as Christmas today. Before the Germans arrived, though, Christmas was just some regular old Wednesday. It was a work day, it was a school day, and the churches around town on a Sunday in December, they would talk about the birth in a manger in Bethlehem. That was the extent of what Christmas was. The most important holiday of the year was Thanksgiving, when everybody would give thanks for what they had. So, but when the Germans came, they brought this whole new concept of Christmas with them. They brought Christmas carols, singing songs. They brought gift giving with them. This was relatively an oddity in Akron, that you would go out and purchase something that you didn't need and that you would give it away to somebody else. And of course, the merchants in town just felt this was fabulous. It was the end of the growing season. Basically, commerce had shut down, and now there was this opportunity to go in and make sales. So gift giving became very popular. The Germans brought us the Christmas tree. There's an article in one of the newspapers about the first Christmas tree and the historic record, about opening the doors and there being a evergreen with little candles lit on it and small toys tied to the branches and boughs of the tree. The Germans brought with them the tradition of holiday parties and big feasts, drinking hard spirits, singing songs, having all of your friends over, dancing. These were all part of the German tradition. The other thing was, for the children, the idea of getting presents. And there's St. Nicholas Day, when the little children put their shoes outside the door, and in the morning they expect to find a bicycle in their shoes. Or on Christmas Eve, the children are visited by a Tinkerbell-like entity. It was the spirit of Christmas. And the spirit of Christmas gives presents. Then on Christmas morning, the children are visited by Father Christmas, who leaves presents under the Christmas tree. Then in January, the children are visited by the Three Kings. So there's this wonderful opportunity all through that holiday season when the children are getting presents. All of these Christmas entities, when they were brought to the United States, were molded together into what we know today as Santa Claus. And the Santa Claus that we all know and love today, with the red suit and the hat with the white trim, and that Santa Claus comes about through an advertising executive who was working for the Coca-Cola company. And he convinced Santa Claus that his threads were old, and the blue in the hood and all that, and he needed a makeover. And so was born the Santa Claus that we all know and love today, who was first introduced in the pages of magazines in full color in the 1930s. under the logo of Coca-Cola Company, which is also red and white. So the old Santa, the Santa that was brought to the United States by the Germans, the Santa who they knew as Father Christmas, blue coat, blue hood, basically the coat that an elderly gentleman would wear. And then later into the 1930s, and when Santa got his makeover, he started to look a lot like the colors of the Coca-Cola logo. He's still the same fellow, though, and he delivers toys to all the good girls and boys. And, of course, he has those toys, and they're inexpensive because of mass production. And that mass production started here in Akron today, which is Lock 3 Park. The story of the Blue Santa, how the children of the world got to get toys for Christmas, is all about this little Blue Santa. That we go to the site where the first toy was mass produced, where from that point forward, all children of the world could have toys, inexpensive toys, that were readily available to all the good little girls and boys. We do archaeology at that site, and we discover Santa Claus. So to find Santa Claus, the oldest Santa Claus known to exist, at the site of the world's first mass-produced toy, well, that makes this site the original North Pole.